They should replace. All right, thank you, Sharanjeet. And it's such a privilege to be hosting this panel, and I'm sure the audience cannot wait for us to get started. So let's do that. So Jonathan, since you're right about here, let's start with Ping An. So Ping An has made AI investments before ChatGPT burst into our world, and it would be great to have your thoughts on what your investment thesis was then, and whether, in your view, if AI has lived up to its hype.
Well, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for including Ping An and for inviting myself on behalf of Ping An to speak today. We're very happy to be part of the forum alongside the colleagues here. And I think I can answer this question maybe on two fronts. One is on behalf of Ping An as an investor in growth venture. So we've made several AI-related investments. But before I get to that, I think it's probably more important and more interesting to talk about what Ping An has done within its own business as a sort of AI-powered company. And as you correctly allude, Ping An has probably 10 years of experience now in building AI capabilities at meaningful scale. So we have about 3,000 data science engineers, and we have gone through, I think, a pretty intensive process over that decade, in starting with some very straightforward applications, such as what wasn't straightforward then, but our proprietary facial recognition, proprietary voice print, and some other image applications. Gradually building natural language capabilities, a lot of machine learning and recursive analytics. For all kinds of things, such as marketing vectoring and response analysis for online communications with customers. So if GPT-3 came out 2 years ago, we'd already, of course, been working with the open source version of GPT-2 and learning from that. But before that, in the natural language space, we'd spent a lot of time building knowledge graphs and creating trained engines to deal with specific topics. So for us, the revolution, let's put it in inverted commas, of GPT-3 and its successors, it was less, wow, we can work with natural language. It was more, wow, we've now got a general tool that doesn't require specific training in the way that we were previously doing it. So, number one, it was much more powerful, and number two, it was vastly more efficient. So for building use cases, chatbot use cases, simple backward and forward inquiries with clients, collections calls for a very large credit provider in China, we found it to be a very powerful enabler. What we've done is we use third-party generic models, of course. We're not about to go and reproduce what Baidu have done in China or what OpenAI have done or many other people. What we have done is built our own domain-specific large language model, or we've built a couple, which is just much more precise in dealing with issues that relate to our proprietary business and our products and our policies. But we still use some of the antecedent models as well, particularly image models such as OCR capture models, where you're trying to, let's say, ingest medical records or documents for one of our customers or patients. We find that the specifically trained models are still far more accurate for some applications. So I think in summary for us, the large language model revolution, firstly, it's a very, very powerful and important extension of AI. There's no doubt about that. But for us, it's another step on a journey across a wide range of AI disciplines. And I'll just make one other point that maybe we can come back to if we have time. I think where the rubber hits the road with all this stuff is how you build the use case, how you architect the user journey, how you architect the workflow, and how you inject the decision engines, the natural language engines in different points. If you haven't architected that properly and you haven't thought through exactly what problem you're trying to solve, you're going to be disappointed with AI in general, I would say. So we've got a lot of experience in doing this. In general, for us, it's a very positive story, and we've sort of arrived at a point where pretty much all parts of our business are working on quite serious AI use cases and achieving serious value from them.
Okay, so I guess AI has lived up to the hype, at least as far as internal use cases are concerned?
Yeah, so what I'd say is that maybe the distinction I'd draw is that I think the generic large language capability, the ability to do translation, the ability to do summarization, the ability to interrogate large bodies of text, I think those generic capabilities by themselves are quite hard to monetize unless you're offering just a subscription service the way OpenAI does it. So in order to actually capture value, there's a lot of hard yards in building these use cases. That's probably the distinction I'd make.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. If we were to sort of adopt a slightly different perspective and look at Europe, and one of the more promising companies coming out of Europe, so Arnor, the Mistral AI, which BPI France is one of the early investors in, I believe has raised about $1 billion over the past 18 months. Right. The interesting bit about those $1 billion is a lot has come from the US. So would be great to have your view on, is this trend likely to continue for other European startups? And if so, what does that mean for European innovation?
Yeah, it's true that big part of the funding of Mistral, which is today the most successful LLM in Europe, has come from US funds. It has also come from French and European funds for a smaller part. We don't see that as an issue, to be honest. It's a proof of its attractivity. It's recognized as one of the most competitive model, and probably the most competitive model from some use cases, including in the US, which is a good point. The big question is how much you need to raise to compete with the other large foundation models. We will see. The path that Mistral has taken is to prove that you can be cost efficient, you can be compute efficient in a way, so you can build a model which is much more streamlined and which will be efficient for the basic use cases that Jonathan just mentioned. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily need to have hundreds of billions of parameters to do a good job. Actually, when we test it and when many of our customers test Mistral against OpenAI or against Llama or against Anthropic or whoever, they get better results with Mistral for much cheaper in terms of inference cost. So there will be, of course, a question of how far do you go in the race in terms of pure brute force. How much calculation do you really need to stake, if you mean? So yes, the question of whether it's US funding or not US funding is not really relevant to us. I mean, as long as you have the good VC funds and you have the good customers, you can grow your company. You have a good ecosystem in Europe, especially in France in terms of AI competencies, clearly. So you can build this kind of company. You have a computing power in France and in Europe. So you have everything. The ecosystem is ready. And if the cash is coming to Europe to finance this kind of companies, that's okay for us. No issue for that.
A follow-up question on Europe and innovation before we move on. What about the EU AI Act? What do you think the implications of that is going to be? Because it was just addressed in one of the other panels. Yeah,
that's a twofold issue. Clearly there's a European bias of starting with regulation. We have to recognize that. You like it or you don't like it. Well, it's the way European Commission is thinking. So they start by thinking regulation. Sometimes it's harmful, sometimes it's useful. If you look at crypto, it's been useful. Having MiCA regulation has helped a lot of companies coming to Europe and working on a kind of understandable and trustable environment. AI Act, you have a controversy with Llama and Meta saying, okay, I'm not going to work under AI Act. If you look at the other US models, they have no problems with AI. So if you dig into the issue of the AI Act, today there's no problem with Mistral, there's no problem with the other AI startups and scale-ups in Europe, no problem with OpenAI, no problem with Anthropic. So there's got to be something else, if you will, with this specific case. So far what we see is that it provides a lot of confidence for the customers of these models. If you're a bank, we're a bank, and you want to really implement your use cases at industrial scale with these models, you have a lot of compliance issues, and your compliance direction feels much at ease with the AI Act than without the AI Act. So far, so good, but it's a matter of balance, clearly. So we need to have people at the European Commission who keeps an ear open to the startups to make sure that it doesn't become harmful.
Yeah, indeed, it is a matter of balance. It would be great to sort of bring in Bijna and your perspectives, which have straddled the globe practically in terms of where you've lived and where you've worked. And so it would be good to have your thoughts on how you're seeing innovation and investment develop across different geographies.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because as we were discussing sort of backstage, different markets have different maturities and therefore different needs around what AI can do for them. So, there's an interesting example of an article that was released by the Washington Post last year, and at the same time there was an article released by an Indian newspaper, and they told two very different stories on the same topic, which was, the impact of AI. So in Washington, what we were seeing was it's a disaster, it's taking away jobs, it's costing livelihoods, it is causing destruction, it's expensive, and so forth. And in India, in the very same week, what we were seeing was this fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It's upskilling and reskilling women, communities. It's putting people with AI capabilities or associated capabilities onto career trajectories that are then putting them online with their global counterparts for the first time, therefore causing an uplift in social mobility, social inclusion, literacy, and it's uplifting communities. And I think wherever you go, at sort of at any given point in time, there will be cases for this. So, ultimately, we've seen articles earlier this year where people have said, do we really need 12,000 versions of ChatGPT? I don't think we do, but I do understand that there are different deviations to support different needs. That said, we're here to talk about the missing revenues, which are absolutely there. And from an investment perspective, assuming that there is, revenue being made as we speak, we will still be in deficit this year. And we want to just sort of touch on the fact that we had in our prep for this session, we talked about one of the Sequoia reports. Sequoia had said earlier this year that we would need to generate at least $600 billion by the end of 2024 from an AI-based tech perspective, just to stay viable. So that's not even to improve and deliver what we're aspiring to deliver. So there is a task that we collectively need to solve there. There is the piece about regulation, about geopolitical situations, about economic limitations that we haven't yet discussed, and I think when my colleagues here do, I'll happily play into that. But ultimately, AI is projected to lose, OpenAI is projected to lose all revenue in funding in the next 12 months. And I think the number for this year so far is $500 billion by the end of this year, so by the end of next month. A couple of points I'm just going to leave you with to think about, and I'll happily sort of add more weight and color as we talk about some of those broader issues that are shaping directly and indirectly the platform that the AI ecosystem exists in. And fintech, I mean, we're here for the Singapore Fintech Festival. Fintech is pretty much heart and soul of that. And it'd be nice to maybe get into some of those discussion points as well.
That's an interesting question. So one of the things I will ask the panel maybe towards the end, if we have some time, is which one of you would still invest in OpenAI at the current valuation? All right. So, one of the points you mentioned, Bijna, was the India angle and the potential benefits that AI could bring to emerging markets. So, Adil, if I could have your view coming in from the largest development finance institution focused on emerging markets, the IFC has played a huge role in driving innovation across its jurisdictions. Obviously, AI brings with it great opportunities, but also potential risks. So how does the IFC view this, and how have you changed your investment allocation, if at all?
Sure. No, thank you, Rafat, for having us here. And for us, I think AI is a tool, right? And I think picking up on some of the earlier comments, I think Jonathan referred to it, it's how you use it. You know, who's directing the usage of it? And from where I sit, I cover financial inclusion for IFC, we see the increased outreach that technology has enabled, right? And so we know, you know, because of data and because of database lending solutions, access to finance has increased considerably across the globe. Access to mobile infrastructure, all of that. Then you layer on the various products on top of that infrastructure. And what we need to make sure is that we're measuring how much of all of this optionality that we're building in creates new opportunities, creates better livelihoods, and is linked to better jobs. Because ultimately, where we sit, we want to measure that. We want to measure the incremental, improved livelihoods that's happening in emerging markets. I think in the case of AI, it's an enabler, if directed and applied the right way. In many jurisdictions, you talk about, you know, the southern hemisphere having the demographic advantage. So much of the capital that's being invested in the US and Europe, they'll test it out in the markets like China, India, Indonesia, and sub-Saharan Africa. But we've also got to make sure that they don't leave the excluded out, you know.
Yeah.
Data is great when it's available, but what we know in many emerging markets, many of the lower income segments don't have much of a data profile. And if they're not in the system, having an application that sifts through mega data isn't going to capture them. So you've got to still make sure that you're providing access and you're increasing the ability to get to the vulnerable communities. And I'm hoping AI and us allows us to do that. From IFC's perspective, I think the other application of AI which would be really important is in the realm of climate change. And coming up with solutions that provides insurance companies and vulnerable communities, especially in the agri sector, ability to mitigate the risks that climate change is going to bring, and maybe come up with solutions which are far more tailored and far more relevant for the lower income segment. So that would be one application that we'd like to see more of.
Thank you, Adil. And Hernan, this actually brings in the conversation we've had before, where you've mentioned that the innovation and application of AI as seen in, let's say, the US or Europe will be quite different from what you see in Latin America. It would be great to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing happening in Latin America and Mexico right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's completely different, right? Because the question on AI dominance maybe started like 20 years ago, and certainly Latin America and the global South are falling certainly behind. So whenever we actually get to see a pitch of an AI company in Latin America, number one, I kind of like get suspicious, right? Because again, you need such a set of tools and talent and access to many different factors that are actually mostly available in developed economies, that actually seeing, I'm not saying that there cannot be like a diamond in the rough, but you know, I think like the most use cases that we're going to see in Latin America are actually taking advantage of the huge population boom that we have, right? In Latin America, it's 650 million people. You know, I think like the use cases that you might have with data or with all of these companies that are just like leveraging technologies to address critical sectors like healthcare, fintech, edtech, agri-tech, it's just massive. So it's more about the tools that many of these visionary entrepreneurs can come and launch fantastic companies that can grow to billions of dollars in revenue a year, you know, using AI kind of like empowerment, right? And we're seeing both, I mean, 2021, to no one's surprise, was the largest funding year in Latin America and BC, with over 18 billion deployed into the region. For the first time ever, we actually overtook Southeast Asia, you know, during those years. But, you know, what we're seeing is, you know, just like a big boom of companies that are better or looking how to leverage all of these like AI technologies into encompassing them into their business models. And the good news about Latin America and the kind of like business that we're building is that fundamentally they're also there to change people's lives, which today obviously makes a big difference, right? And even though that we have certain challenges, for example, by 2030, it is expected that AI will impact Latin American GDP only 5% compared to 15% in developed economies. But the leapfrog solutions that we can provide, in clinical trials or clinical data, I think Adel is making like a very good point about how can we have all of these populations like using metadata and become part of the system, which today in the global south continues to be one of the biggest problems, right? For example, we're in a fintech event, 74% of Mexico. In Latin America is actually banked compared to Southeast Asia, where the number is approximately 60%. So Latin America is better banked than Southeast Asia, but there is such a lack of products and services. So I will not claim that Latin America is underbanked. It's severely understaffed for products, right? And today, for example, we have a very analog credit bureau system where literally if you fall behind on payment or whatever, you're banned from the financial system for 3 years. And no one has come up with like a metadata solution on how to bring those people back into the financial system. So these are people that are completely banned from the financial ecosystem for 3 years because they probably owe a telco like $10, 2 years ago. So again, the kind of like solutions that entrepreneurs are bringing to the table and reinserting these, people into the economy using data and everything, I think it's what's going to spur the new breed of unicorns in the region.
No, absolutely. And I think, what I was thinking of as you're speaking, the one thematic that keeps coming up, not just in this discussion, but also throughout the day, is how to utilize technology for the greater good. And given that we are the Capital Meets Policy Dialogue, which brings in the policy and investor perspective, the one question that comes to mind is, all right, if I were to ask all of you, which is a very global group of investors, what is the one single thing a policymaker can do to ensure that, number one, there is innovation in the jurisdictions they cover, but also that the innovation is used for public good? So perhaps, Hernan, you can get us started?
Yeah, I think that the government, again, it already failed, in terms of R&D or whatever, so it needs to really give the right tools, the right education or whatever to actually start leveraging these data, these data products or whatever into kind of like the broader ecosystem. So, for example, in terms of fintech, again, I think that the sandbox that needs to be created in order to bring a lot of these people into the realm of these products and services, to just like bring them back to the banking population, I think it's critical. It needs to hire companies that are leveraging these technologies even as service provider. I mean, think about Mexico, where 20% of the GDP still comes from the government is a very relevant player when it comes to buying or from SMEs, right? So compared to the US or more developed economies, countries in Latin America still depend on the government. So the government is not only a regulator, it's also a massive customer for many of these companies. So you need to actually find the right fit or programs or whatever to give smaller SMEs or entrepreneurs the right set of tools and access to be able to also service the government, because again, it's a very important driving force when it comes to the kind of products that you can sell to governments in Latin America, at least.
Absolutely. Jonathan, what's your view?
Well, I think firstly, this whole space is, I think, still at an early stage of evolution. And I think this transformer technology is immensely powerful, and it's absolutely a breakthrough. We have very senior AI data scientists who are, PhDs from Carnegie Mellon over the last few decades and have been building AI solutions for at least 20 years. And when GPT-3 came out, they said that I don't care who you're talking to, this is we never had anything like this until now in natural language. I mean, it really is extraordinary. And I'm sure people have heard Bill Gates talk about, doing the AP biology exam or something. Come and talk to me when it can do the AP biology exam. And guess what? It can do that. I mean, it is extraordinary. So, but I think we're at a stage where if we over-regulate at this point in time and constrain where these capabilities can evolve, we risk doing a lot of damage. And standing in the way of very, very important R&D that can be very helpful. I think Arnaud can comment on the European regulation. I think Europe seems to have gone down a path of, I think someone told me that the European regulatory framework is now 870 pages long or something like that. Most of it's some people are arguing that a lot of it's sort of already out of date. I think it's much better to have a principles-based approach. The fact is there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of embedded risks with these tools. So, for example, anyone can remember their statistics. Remember the stepwise regression that allows you to look at a multivariate analysis and say, well, how much did each variable contribute to the correlation that you're trying to analyze? You can't do that systematically with a transformer model. So you really don't know exactly why it tells you to do what it's telling you to do, or why it's created the output that it's created. In many applications, that's a problem. So one of the solutions, one of the ways we try to deal with that is to break down the problems and then have the transformers solving individual steps in the problem, so at least we can isolate what the output for that step was, rather than the total end-to-end output, if it's possible to do that. So that's one way to do it. But this is going to be a problem, and I don't think there's going to be an easy solution to that. There are lots of possible embedded risks as well. I mean, there's much discussion in the media, of course, about hallucinations and so forth. So if you have a customer facing even a chatbot and it's something important like financial services or health, you can't run the risk of the model just making stuff up that could tell people to go and do things that are completely inappropriate and would be either costly or harmful to them. That's clearly a major problem. Equally, what is less discussed is the possibility of inserting malware into models. So that intentionally bad outcomes are created, but they're not visible to anybody and they're totally unauditable. So that is very much a real concern. And I think the possibility that you have code writing where increasingly we're seeing quite good code writing capabilities and codeless development frameworks that are using transformer technology. How do you actually, apart from doing testing, how do you actually audit that code? Is there a process that's equivalent to the process that would happen in a manual coding shop to make sure that code actually has integrity, it doesn't have backdoors, it doesn't have obvious bugs or even less obvious bugs that could be serious problems later on? So I think this is just a sample of some of the very serious issues that need to be addressed. I think the first principle has to be that the developers of that technology and the purveyors of that technology have to be responsible for their product. There must be product liability. And anyone that wants to use this technology in a service must be responsible end-to-end for that service and accountable in the same way that they would be for a non-AI or non-transformer-based service. But so I do think it's going to be an evolving area. I don't think it's an area that I think it will require regulation and legal framework development to make sure there's proper responsibility and accountability allocated. But I think at this stage we have to be extremely careful not to kill the baby, before it's born.
And be principles-based. Arnaud, you've got to respond to this.
Yeah. We all know that ultimately AI will be regulated, just like the financial industry is regulated. This is too big, too important, too powerful not to be regulated. So we all know that all these actors, the successful ones, they will be regulated. So they have to be aware of that. And at the same time, you don't want to kill the baby, for sure. So as long as you see the baby is thriving, and so far they are thriving, I kind of think that AI Act, maybe it's a lot of pages, but basically it's a draft. It will evolve because technology is evolving, so it will evolve in time. As long as it doesn't prevent innovation from existing, that's fair enough for us. Then, as far as government action is implied, I think the two key things are data and education. There's a lot of data sets which are with governments in health, in security, and there's a lot of use cases you can build on that, and they fully depend on governments. So governments should provide the playground for AI actors to work on this kind of data. That's one thing, and education, obviously, is absolutely key. A lot of works and a lot of jobs are going to change. You need to prepare the population for that. And if you want to have, AI-ready engineers able to work in this kind of industry, you also need to have the right educational system. So I would say the two key points for governments on top of regulation, which I do agree is not the most urgent one, I think really are providing data and providing the safe area to work on data, especially on health and care, I would say, and security. And then education is absolutely key. If your population is not ready to change across their lives, you're going to have a big issue.
Thank you, Arnaud. And Adil?
So for us, I think it comes down to the users, right? It's their data. And financial consumer protection is critical. That, yes, data can be shared, it could be aggregated, it could be manipulated to create different scenarios, different sort of analysis, but it has to be for the betterment of the people whose data you're manipulating. And so if there have to be certain guardrails around financial consumer protection, there have to be certain guardrails around cybersecurity. And I don't know whether we know which agency of the government is best suited to do that, but there has to be an understanding that it can't be manipulated that causes harm to the data providers, because that'll break down the trust, right? And I don't know whether the model will be able to self-correct unless there is that manual intervention that then directs, like you said, the various components need to be able to be somehow audited and managed so that there is some auto-correction mechanism that allows for financial consumer protection, especially for the ones that aren't as literate and as aware of what their data is being used for.
Yeah, I believe the EU AI Act has made it a point to introduce the human element in order to ensure that the data is not being manipulated. So at least that's one positive. Bijna, what about you?
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? Because Goldman Sachs had reported earlier this year that the capex costs are increasing, and this year I think we're 84% higher than we have been in the last 5 years for developing AI, and there's no visible measure around that. And if we go back to your question about AI for good would mean increasing literacy, consumer protection, individual level protection for vulnerable customers or consumers for the ecosystem that it's serving, not necessarily financial services, because we're now seeing even fintech or AI play into all verticals and sectors. And then accountability and inclusion, right? But it's about strengthening digital infrastructure to get the right results. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is, a lot of dangers actually. So where you've got most vulnerable, let's take fintech again as an example, since we're at the fintech festival, where you're looking at vulnerable consumers or customers, and typically, a third of these globally are women, right? So if we take that segment and we really specify it, fintech, women, vulnerable customers, how do we protect them? Well, we want to give them accessibility to finance, we want to give them access to digital banking, we want to give them literacy. Globally, universally, that's a problem we're trying to solve, and we're using AI through fintech to do that. However, we can at the same time expose them, because there are risks about scraping, extracting, and manipulating data through their mobile phones or through their online banking systems or through their internet that could leave them in more vulnerable and compromised positions. There are direct and indirect risks and threats that the fintech ecosystem globally is trying to solve for consumers right now. Loss of privacy, ID theft, fraud, scams. $100 being taken from, let's say, our bank accounts might not impact us so much, right, at the end of a given day. But $100 from someone who only makes $100 a month in one of these vulnerable brackets, that could be the difference between, you know, whether they can survive for that month or not. And so I think there's a piece around responsibility that needs to be embedded into AI. Also, I think inadequate data management by firms can cause risks. We've seen a lot of breaches in the last few years where there have been cyber attacks of all sorts. It's not to say the companies are not managing them, but of course we're not immune. And so we need to figure out a global or a universal way of addressing those. And let me again just put it into context for you. Each cyber attack costs around $5.9 million to the global community that it impacts. And one single major payments attack could cost the world economy $3.5 trillion. So imagine one vulnerable customer trying to make a payment, it goes wrong, bam, $3.5 trillion to the world economy. So there is a lot that AI has to enable in this journey, but also it could also be a disabler. It could also be something that opens up those risks. And so I think we still have a lot of work to do there. I interviewed the German Ministry of Finance and Economic Development at an event earlier this year. And we also talked about the fact that economic empowerment and economic disempowerment kind of are two ends of the same spectrum when it comes to AI and fintech more broadly. And I think for me, that measure, the ability to monetize, the ability to measure, the ability to control those journeys becomes increasingly important because of the risks associated with them that could outweigh the benefits in an instant.
Thank you, Virginia. So, you know, we've got a group of investors here, and I'm sure the audience would like to figure out how you're going to deploy money. Not the OpenAI question we're going to wait for. We've got some time. So, in your view, which is the most promising either geography or sector within, or subsector rather, within AI? So Adil, I see you nodding. You want to go ahead?
I'm nodding. Look, I think for us, since we only invest in emerging markets, I look at markets where you have open data. You have more data points, more fluidity in terms of how that data can be used, upon which you can apply an AI tool, right? So Brazil comes to play, India comes to play, obviously China. I think we're seeing quite a few interesting plays in sub-Saharan Africa, where things are slowly opening up. But it's really about, you know, yes, you have access to data, yes, you have models which could be refined, and from IFC's perspective, we're always looking for, you know, that perfect triangle where it makes sense commercially, it has a developmental impact, and then it has an overall sectoral, you know, improvement, like we talked about, livelihoods and things like that. So for me, that would be where we would like to start, but we would like to also be selective in who we partner with. And that's that same mindset where you want to test, you certainly want to put some capital behind innovative, entrepreneurial ideas, but with the right safeguards and not go completely wild.
Right. Hernan?
Yeah, I would say, you know, we, for example, have the number one and number two largest fintechs in Mexico. When it comes to revenues, right? So we have seen, you know, the massive impact that, you know, gathering this data and being able to create like a de facto FICO score in Latin America, and what have we brought to the table in terms of, you know, leading with buy now, pay later, or, you know, direct credit facility solutions, right? So, I think fintech will continue to be, you know, a great beneficiary of, you know, of where this can lead to. You know, similar to Adele, the thing about like Latin America again is that you have these big populations that are just like hungry for more, right? And for all of you entrepreneurs like out there is like, if you can think about how you can continue to bring data from different sources and create like about putting tools in place to create like new kind of like services for, you know, these very starved middle income countries or middle masses, it's fantastic. And actually, one thing that we have been, you know, constantly evaluating is, there's 33 unicorns in Latin America. There's 53 unicorns in Southeast Asia. So those gaps, if you actually follow every single unicorn in Latin America, you will find a comparable company. It can be buy now, pay later. It can be, alternative banking, credit cards, etc. But there is still a lot of solutions out there that have not reached Latin America. And I think something similar can be said about like Middle East, Northern Africa. I love, for example, the Indian example because India is able to leverage deep tech or deep technology to some of the problems that we actually have in our countries, right? It can be, very highly condensed populations where logistics can be a nightmare, last mile delivery. I mean, there's so many things that you can actually leverage from one region to another using AI. I think, again, fintech is key. Healthcare will continue to be also massively impacted, and obviously it's something that, the largest healthcare system in Spanish-speaking Latam today used to be the Mexican government. Now it's actually like a local company called Farmacias Similares, where they pivot this model about having in-house visitations in the pharmacy chain to doctors, right? So what they're now leveraging in terms of that data or everything, it's literally world transformational, right?
All right, so fintech and healthcare in Latam. Arnaud?
Well, generally speaking, I think layer 2 applications, building vertical models on large foundation models, so fintech, health, other sectors, definitely there's a lot of value still to be extracted here. Same with software company. I think the right software company which already have the customer base and which have really the ability to embed AI within their customer value can still build a lot of value, as opposed to the ones we will not be able. So probably we'll see winners and losers in the software industry, generally speaking. A lot of things on cybersecurity and AI. There's obviously a tension between the two. A lot of things on identity proofing. So probably blockchain and AI on the theme of how do you make sure that you can still identify agents and differentiate agents from real people on social networks, on the web, etc. So there's a lot of themes. And to answer the OpenAI question, I don't think the key theme today would be to invest in foundation models. It's probably a smarter move to invest on new models, trying to get out of transformers and going to the next generation of models which will work on different bases.
Okay. Arnaud, thank you for answering the OpenAI question. I'm going to come back to everyone else on that, though. Bijna, and then Jonathan, it would be great to have your views on where you see the most value accruing.
Yeah, so just picking up on what Arnaud said, my focus is fintech. It's set to be a $150 trillion economy by 2030, growing 5x. There's a lot of interesting work that's happening in that ecosystem, underpinned by AI, and also a lot of merging of fintech with other industries and verticals. So that's a really interesting point of inflection for me. But to see where true value is being created, whether that's from an impact side for good, or whether that's from a kind of iteration of how do we streamline products and propositions that are being offered, and how do we make them accessible, and how do we make them measurable from an impact perspective as well. Those are some of the areas where I'm looking at to pay more attention before making investment decisions.
Great. Jonathan?
Well, most of our investment is internal. It's strengthening our capabilities, it's extending our use cases, and it's building deep domain-specific capabilities that are relevant to our integrated finance business and to our healthcare businesses. And so, I mean, good examples would be, we're the largest car insurer in the world, so we've got quite sophisticated optical claims management solutions, so you can scan the damage and of an external damage of a car. We can automatically assess whether the part or parts need to be replaced or whether they can be fixed, and then what it's going to cost. And if the user chooses, we can settle with them literally on the curbside remotely. This is a platform we've developed over 8 or 9 years now, so it's reached a pretty high state of maturity, and it's handling about 60-70% of our claims volume. So as a really big car insurer, that's really, really meaningful. We've got another set of capabilities that are using LLM capabilities to support the sales process. So we've been able to basically automate about the equivalent of about 6,000 jobs just in our auto insurance sales process alone. So that's an enormous productivity enabler for us. We've got an interesting set of capabilities in aged care. So China, of course, is a market where aged care is an enormous growth opportunity and a necessity. There just isn't the infrastructure to look after the aging population. So we're focused on both at-home and aged care facilities, but we've got a whole range of AI-based tools that try to support elderly people in their home with suitable devices that are suitable for people that have less finger mobility or finger agility, and who may have hearing issues, may have sight issues, and so forth. So with the right type of user interface, but a whole range of services ranging from health and other services that makes it easier and safer for those people to be in their home. So I think that's where the majority of our investment will lie. If you look outside, it's actually a very difficult space to invest in because firstly, I think a lot of the business models for these big LLM companies are unproven, so they're a long way from being proven. And secondly, I think that valuations are just prohibitive, for any kind of rational business case for most investors. And I think we've yet to see the emergence of a next tier of companies who are actually focused on either use case builder technology or deep domain-specific capabilities that I think can sit alongside and integrate with generic large language models. So I think there's going to be interesting evolution over the next few years, but it's a very difficult space to invest in, I would say, right now.
So Jonathan, I think I already know your answer to whether you'd invest in OpenAI, but perhaps for the sake of clarifying.
Well, we never comment on any individual investment that we may or may not make. I should say that. But we're not planning to invest in an external LLM platform at this point in time.
Right, perfect. So we've got 2 minutes thereabouts left. Is anyone else going to take the bait? OpenAI, show of hands? No, no one.
We're going to wait and
Wow.
watch.
We bet on Mistral, so it's an easy answer.
Yes. Okay, so how about, again, let's take advantage of the time. So fine, not OpenAI. You would not you will not point out any specific potential opportunity. That's all right. We know Mistral. Let's get Hernan, Bijna, and Adil's view. If not OpenAI, any other promising company that you see on the horizon that maybe our audience can take a look at?
You want me to start? No, I mean, look, for us, we're always looking for good opportunities. Let's see the turns and twists the next few months bring us. But I think for us, it would be building that infrastructure. I think AI requires a lot of energy. I think there'll be a lot more onshoring, and there'll be a lot more potentially protective steps being taken in different geographies. And so from an emerging markets perspective and as part of the World Bank Group, we got to make sure that the impact felt in the poorest countries is somewhat lessened. The blow is lessened, right? Because you don't want capital to be sucked out and certain geographies to be neglected. So our role becomes that much more important to step in to make sure that there is that preservation of jobs and the right sort of data services being provided to those that need it.
Thank you, Adil. So let's...
in our case, if I might add, I just remember, the scooternomics lessons, from Silicon Valley, where over $3 billion were spent and there's very little to show for. So when it comes to AI, I really want to see, real transformational human change,
Absolutely.
So definitely, again, companies like Cure AI, out from India that are kind of like doing things for health and, vision imagery, etc., things like that. Or Elsa out of Vietnam, just like helping improve English proficiency. Or RIID from Korea, like an online tutor. We love those examples because, again, they're fundamentally using AI, but also to empower population. And don't get me wrong, we're not an impact investor, but we just love when you also hit, the human kind of like, potential bottom line besides making a great business.
Absolutely. I think that's a that's a great way to view an investment opportunity. And in fact, we announced our own organization earlier this week with a huge focus on how can technology be a force for good. So I think we're all aligned there. So thank you, everyone, for this wonderful conversation. And I'm sure there's many such over the next few days. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congrats.